What's up, guys? Today is part 2 of our Cinema 4D intro. We're going to bring our renders and our passes from Cinema 4D into After Effects, do some compositing, some color grading, and make things look a little sexier. Oh yeah! Hey, what's up, guys? Today we're continuing with our fractured intro look. This is part 2 of the tutorial, so if you want to see the Cinema 4D section, check out part 1. But otherwise, let's bring in our renders from Cinema 4D and start kind of color correcting them and giving them a little bit of a look. So yeah, let's just jump in as usual. Transition. Oh, yes, we did it. All right, cool. So let's just start bringing in all our renders and passes and giving it a little look. So here we go. Just going to double click, get us started. Here is our AEC file from Cinema 4D. Just going to bring that in and broke it up into our passes and our main comp here. So right now the ambient occlusion pass is in there, already set to multiply for us. So let's just go ahead and start bringing all these in. Here's my base render. I'm going to start with that. Underneath, I'll take the depth and all the object buffers. I'm going to put them on top. And I'm going to start breaking these down. So this will be our background. And I'm going to go over to the effects. And I'm going to use Set Matte. I did another tutorial on how I like to use Set Matte versus setting everything to either Luma Matte or, breaking it up into multiple layers like that. So yeah, if you want to kind of see a more broken down version of that, check out that tutorial as well. But otherwise, let's just keep going. I'm going to set this to Luminance, and we're going to pick Object Buffer 3. All right, so now the logo's cut out. Let's go ahead and make this our text layer. Switch this to 1. So now if I solo that, I have just the text. And let's go forward a little bit. Duplicate this again. This is our logo. And I'll set that to Object Buffer 2. So then if I turn those off, all right, now we have the logo soloed. So in the final kind of example render I used, I actually didn't end up using the lights or the camera. So I'm just going to go ahead and turn all those off. And I might just go ahead and shine since we don't really need them. All right, so where can we start? All right, so let's go ahead and start with the depth pass first and kind of get some depth of field in there and see what we got going on. So it's going to create a new adjustment layer. We'll call it depth of field. And normally I like to use the Frischluft depth of field, but we're going to go ahead and use camera lens blur. Because, we can use the built-in After Effects tools to kind of get the same look. Blur map, I'm going to use our depth layer from Cinema 4D. So I'm just like depth. And let's see here. Let's kind of get to a frame where we can kind of see how it's working. Let's turn it up a little bit. Now that we have our depth, we can sort of play with the focal distance to kind of see, if we want more of a front blur or a back blur. I might just do this for now. And the depth, let's give it a little more contrast to kind of emphasize our depth a little bit. So what I might just do is pre-comp this, because if we add any effects on top of our depth matte while it's not pre-comped, the effect won't see it. So I'm going to go ahead and pre-comp it. And I might just actually use an exposure. And let's turn up the gamma a little bit. Just give it a little more black and white contrast. And let's turn that off. And since we have a little bit more of that black and white contrast, we're going to start getting a shallower depth of field. And so we kind of got some issues happening here. We got a little bit of this extra fringing on the side. So if you ever kind of run into that problem, you got two things going on. A, you might have a little bit too much depth of field. But another thing we can do is if I go back in here and just to not make these edges so sharp, sometimes I just add a little bit of a fast blur. Just, to soften up the matte just a little bit on the edges. And it'll start to clean it up a little bit here. So let's keep going. We'll just work through the problems as they come up. So one thing I might do with the background is give the background a little more depth of field as well, just by using another camera lens blur. So we'll take that. Maybe we'll give it just, blur a 3 for now. And we still got a little bit of that fringing going on. So let's see if simple choker and reversing it will kind of get rid of some of those edges. So there we go. Let me reset that so we can see it again. In case you ever run into this issue. All I did is we're just kind of bringing in the matte a little bit. And once we unsolve that, you can see we're starting to get rid of that fringe. Let me reset it once more. And I'm just choking it in a little bit. So let's just do 2 for now. All right, cool. So just gonna kind of keep tweaking things to where we like it, and we'll get there. So another thing I might do is add another adjustment layer real quick. Let's call this our levels. Again, if I could type, notoriously bad at that apparently. And there it is again. And I might just do a little bit of a contrasting. Cool. So just a little subtle contrast. Nothing that always bothers me is just the overall sharpness of it. So I like to use a little bit of a overall blur. And for that, I just use a little bit of a Gaussian blur. Usually 0.5, 0.8 kind of does the trick. All right, so it's just not as sharp. Super subtle effect still. So with that levels adjustment, let's see, because this is we're going from the sunlight in kind of the shade. Let's go ahead and look at what our sunlight looks like. So, okay, cool. We're not blowing it out too much. One thing that kind of bothers me is if we look at the black of our text versus the black of these poles in the background, they just don't really match right now. So I'm going to do Alt-1 to look at the red channel, but it's just a fast way that I can look at, black and white levels real fast. So I'm going to go ahead and select our text, add a levels. And all I'm going to do is just pull up the blacks and kind of have it match that background a little bit more. So maybe a little like that. And our whites are still our whites are a lot brighter as well. So let's get to that white extrusion. So we can see kind of the white here versus the whites in the background. So I might just bring those down a little bit too. Maybe not too much. All right, let me fit this again. Alt-1 to get back to our image. So that's helping a little bit. Let's add a little bit of grunge. And I kind of covered this in another tutorial as well, but I'm just going to throw on some optical flares. If you don't have optical flares, you can use any sort of grungy, smudgy image, but this just has a nice built-in, smudge textures that get the job done. So let's see, let's go with this smudgy. Speaking of smudgy, bring that in. I'm just going to set this to on transparent. And let's see what we got here. Probably show up on the later scene a little bit more. Yeah, there we go. So I'm just going to go ahead and bring the opacity down a little bit. Just mix it in, Again, every little effect we're going to do is just little subtle effect. All right, I'm going back real quick to the depth mat. And let's just make sure we got things in focus here. So it's giving a little bit of subtle effect. So since this is gray on white, this isn't going to be 100% in focus when we land. So, let's go back here to our actual depth mat that we pre-comped. And I might just bring the gamma down a little bit more so it's a little bit more in focus, because black is going to be what's in focus, white is out of focus. And I'll turn that back off. And so right now the camera lens blur is still sort of inverting our effect here. So it's actually taking the white and making that more in focus and the black out of focus. So if you ever run into that problem, you can actually just invert your blur map. So let me zoom in here and invert it and see if our logo gets back into focus here. So there we go. You can see how the focus shifts, especially up here. Cool. So, all right. So we got our focus set a little bit better now. Let's see what our text focus looks like. All right. So we are getting there. All right. So we kind of got our basic color adjustments going on. We have our logo separated. Let's go ahead and just ram previous really quick and see if we have any issues. I have a feeling there might be an issue between when the Phoenix and the actual logo switch. So let's go ahead and take a look at that. All right, cool. So we kind of got some of our color adjustments going on. We're obviously missing some things like, some of the film effects, like our motion blur, some sort of lens effects, some chromatic aberrations, stuff like that. So if we want to, we can always come back to this, but let's go ahead and keep moving and start adding some of those, lens effects to dirty it up that, seem to, give our CG renders a little bit more life. So let's just start maybe right here. And I'm going to go ahead and just pre-comp all this. We'll call this build for now. Why not? And as usual, first thing I'll do is a chromatic aberration effect. So let's go to set channels. And if you've seen any of my other tutorials, you've probably seen me do this a ton of times. Let's go ahead and turn this off. Duplicate the layer, reset the effect, turn the red layers off, and set the top layer to add. So now we're back to where we started. Let's go ahead and get in here, and this is the part where I just like to scale it up just a little bit, start getting that chromatic aberration effect. So I'll go ahead and tone this down to maybe 100.4%. Even that might be a lot. Let's do 0.3. Let's see, we'll leave it at 0.3 for now. It's still kind of a lot, but we'll leave it for now. One thing I did notice is I kind of want this. I'm going to delete this overall blur. I'm going to put it on top of this layer actually to kind of maybe even blur out that chromatic aberration effect a little bit more. So I went ahead and changed it to 100.2. So we'll see how that goes for now, and then we'll change it later if we want. Let's see. Another thing that's kind of bugging me is no motion blur. The motion blur is going to help hide this transition point. So I'm going to go ahead and go with Real Smart Motion Blur. If you don't have Real Smart Motion Blur, go ahead and use CC Force Motion Blur. For this example, I'm going to use Real Smart Motion Blur just because it kind of gives a better blur effect. It's a little bit faster, and it's also GPU accelerated, which helps for me as well. So go ahead, turn the GPU acceleration on. Maybe the blur amount is more like 0.3. We'll turn up the sensitivity a little bit. And right away, that's sort of helping give our CG render some life there. One of the things that's also happening, though, if I turn this up a little bit, let's go something crazy, is you kind of get this smearing and this weirdness. So a couple things that's happening with that is it's kind of running out of the pixel. So if I turn on the transparency, you can see that it's starting to almost go it's starting to give it some transparency because it's running out of pixels to pull from. So something that helps with that is just having a layer underneath to go underneath everything, even if you can't see it. So I just made a black solid, and you know what? I'm just going to scale it up just a little bit. And you can see it's starting to fill those pixels back in. And this is kind of an extreme example because we don't want our blur that much. I'm just going to go more subtle with it. But, you know, hopefully that helps if you ever run into that problem. And so another thing that's happening is we're getting our overall blur is bringing in the edges a little bit. So if I exaggerate this, you know, it's running out of pixels. So another solution for that is I'm just going to go ahead and make a new adjustment layer. This is our optics. We use optics compensation. I'm going to reverse the lens distortion to get that pull effect that I like versus bulging it out. And I'm just going to pull out the edges a little bit so we get sort of that camera warping as it goes on the edges. And that also takes care of our blurriness, sort of bringing in our edge pixels. So cool. So all right, we're getting that. You know what? This might be another time to adjust our colors a little bit. So I'll go ahead and I might just duplicate this and do a curves. Delete the optics compensation. And we'll just give this a little more contrast boost. Go to the blue channel. I'm just going to bring up the blue levels and the blacks and the shadows a little bit. So let's see here. Yeah, I'll give it just a little bit like that. So we're kind of getting some nice little blues in the dark areas. Let's go ahead and bring it out a little bit. All right, so let's go ahead and duplicate our curves. Delete it. This will now be our, let's make it our blur vignette. And let's just go with another fast blur. Just blur it out a little bit, repeat those edge pixels. Hitting Q to get to our mask tool here. And we'll just double click to make an ellipse mask. Invert it. Let's feather it maybe 175. So we got a subtle blurring on there now. I might even bring it down even more. Let's say 10. Cool. Now that we have that, let's go ahead and duplicate it. This will just be our regular vignette. And instead of a fast blur, just going to delete that, get another levels here. And let's bring the black levels down. Might make the feathering even more on this, 300. And we'll tone it down a little bit. But we'll get a subtle vignette on the outside. Cool, so we got that. We got our blur. What a couple other things we can add real fast. Make a new adjustment layer. Let's just tint it a little bit because it's still a little bit too saturated. Yeah, and I have a feeling if I come back over here, the sky is pretty saturated as well. So yeah, let's just, we're going to tone it down just a little bit. There we go. We don't want it monochromatic, but maybe let's just do 25%. And I'm going to do a couple of other things to the CG part of this real quick. So I'm just going to solo the 3D part of this. And you know what? Let's go ahead and we're going to make our own flare from this. And I'm just going to turn off the set channels. And this is a good little trick if you want to get some kind of secondary motion with not a lot of effort. And it's another lens flare effect you can do if you don't happen to have any other plugins or, you know, if you want to just add some extra motion to it. So we're going to try to replicate a lens flare that happens in the camera. So this won't be 100% accurate, but, you know, it'll look cool and we'll get away with it. So all I did is just rotate our footage. It's still set to add mode. So I'm going to rotate 180 degrees. And you know what, for now, I'm going to set it to normal so you can kind of just see what's happening here. And let me unhide these layers. I'm going to scale it up just a little bit. And what you kind of get those lens flares from in the camera is the highlights. So I'm going to add a Luma key, and we want to try to keep the brights as much as we can. So I'm going to go ahead and just turn the threshold up on key out darker. So we're getting rid of the darks and keeping the brights. And I'm just going to kind of go extreme with this because we're going to tweak it a little bit more. All right, so I might just keep sort of the sky highlights there. And then the next thing I'll do is add a radial blur. And what this is doing, let me turn off the transparencies. We're going to kind of get that flare, that lens flare feel. And we're just going to crank this up. Cool. So what I'm going to do is I want these highlights kind of in the corner right here. So this is just controlling which part of the radial blur is showing up here. And then to get even more contrast, I'm going to set a levels on this. And we're just going to crush it a little bit more. I might even key it a little bit more. And I'm liking these ones over here. So there we go. And I'm going to tint it just a little bit to bring it down. And I'll set it back to add. And let's put it on top of our footage. Cool, so what we have is actual lens flare now that is reacting to what our footage is doing. And it kind of gives us that secondary motion that's, a little added bonus. It's a little bright right now. It's a little, we want it to be subtle as usual. So let's see what 10% looks like. And maybe I'll go up to, let's say 13. Ooh, 13, let's try it again. All right, so it's there, it's subtle. We'll see it more when it renders. So let me solo the 3D again. I want to put this layer on top. This will be our diffusion. I'll turn off the set channels. Let's go ahead and just solo it by itself. I'm just going to add an overall fast blur to this. And I'm going to set it to normal. But I'm going to turn the opacity way down. So it's just giving us a subtle little diffusion of the lens there. All right, cool. Now there we go. So one of the last adjustments layers I'll do is just finish it off with some color finesse. Yikes, that's not even close to the right spelling. Is that? Maybe? I don't know. Let's go ahead and use color finesse, open the full interface. And, this way it'll just kind of give us a little bit more control. We can start playing with the colors a little bit more. But we get to see our levels and our brights and our darks and kind of just see where all our levels and colors are hitting. So I'm just going to go ahead and turn all these on, even if we don't use them all. And let's see, the highlights I might bring down just a little bit. And let's see what it looks like if I bring the shadows down as well. So let's go ahead and just bring, it gives us a little more contrast. I actually might not want that too much. I kind of like this more flat look that we have going on. Let's see, let's go to the hue offsets. And I'm just going to kind of set this high right now and see if there's a look that we like. So I'm actually kind of liking this warm look. It's a little bit different. Kind of changes the colors a little bit. I'm going to go ahead and give the shadows a little bit more blues. We'll give the highlights a little bit more of this gold color. And let's just kind of turn that on and off, see what it looks like. So yeah, it's kind of making our scene mesh a little bit more. Maybe I will bring the shadows down just a little bit. Let me reset that property. And I'm just going to bring them down just a little bit. One of the tricky things about color grading or color correcting bright areas and dark areas in the same scene is sometimes we might have to keyframe how those are going once we go from the brights to the shadows. So we've been kind of looking at this section a lot. Let's look at what the end section looks like here, and if we're too dark. Okay, yeah, so our logo is a little too dark in this area. So this is what we can do. So this scene is looking okay out here, but once we get in here, things are getting a little too dark. So one of the things we can do is just go back to our build inside, and let's just solo the logo, text, and background. And what I might actually do is, with the background level right here, when we start to transition into the dark, I'm just going to go ahead and set a levels. I'm going to keyframe it. And kind of when we get to this position, I want to move the midtone so it gets just a little bit brighter. And just real quick, let's see if that will work in our scene. So actually, that was a pretty easy adjustment on that. We could also probably do the same thing to the logo if we want it to stand out a little bit more, because it's a little dark as well. So I'm just going to try copying these same levels to our logo. And let's just see if it's too bright. So yeah, that might be a little bit too much. So I'll just go bright, but maybe not that bright. And let's see what that looks like real quick. Just adjusting through the color channels with Alt 1, 2, and 3. And I'm going to hit end, look at our last frame real quick. All right, cool. So that is standing out a little bit better. It's a little bit easier to see. And we're almost done. Last thing to do is I'm just going to go ahead and do that flash frame in that we saw in the example to kind of blur everything out and, you know, bring it back down to give us a quick little transition. So new adjustment layer. This will be our flash frame. And I'm going to use a levels. And I'm just going to crank this up. Let's crank it up. I'll set a keyframe right there. What I'll also do is use a fast blur. Set a keyframe from the fast blur as well. Repeat the edge pixels. And let's just crank this up to kind of, you know, give us a little blooming effect. And let's see, we have 24 frames per second. So let's just go to 24. Reset our levels. And you know what? Let's actually do half of the level. So let's do 10 frames. And let's go to 20. And I'm going to have the fast blur go out after the levels. So we'll have the brightness first, and then fading out after that is the fast blur effect. So we'll have this be 0. And maybe I'll have it just a couple more frames back. Just going to ease those in. So now I have this nice little blooming out lens blur sort of effect. Cool, and that's starting to look really good. We've come a long way from just a straight up CG render, so it's going good. Last thing I'll add, this is actually the last thing, is last adjustment layer. Just going to add some noise and grain. And, you know, a lot of times I like using grain footage, but for this one, I will go ahead and just use noise versus grain just because it's a little bit faster. I don't want any color in it, and I might set it to 3%. I might go to the last frame because that's where we'll see the most grain in the darks here. So let's just kind of turn that on off. Cool, so let's go to maybe 5% grain. We'll make it real grainy. And I'll switch over the project file really quick. Set to 16 bits per channel before we render. And let's go ahead and RAM preview this. I might do it at half just to speed it up. And yeah, we'll just RAM preview this really quick and see what it looks like. All right, cool guys. So here's our logo intro. Made a little bit better in After Effects. You know, a little bit of those lens effects go a long way. So yeah, I hope that helps. Hope that helps out. This project file, the After Effects section of it, and the Cinema 4D project file are both available for free. So you can take those if you want them. You can throw your logo in there, do the same sort of fractured extrusion, And since we broke it up with object buffers, you can put in any background that you want. So yeah, I hope that helps. Tutorials next week. Leave a comment if you have any questions. And yeah, thanks again. I'll talk to you guys next time.